Grace, mercy, and peace to you, Internet. Welcome back to Lutheran in a Strange Land. My name is Matthew E. Cochran. I blog at the 96th Thesis. I'm a contributor at the Federalist. And my goal on this channel is to help you learn to discern the truth from the lies in theology, in philosophy, in our culture. Because once Satan has you believing his words instead of God's, your battle is lost. Our victory is only in the truth of Jesus Christ. Now, it has been a while since I've done one of these, but seeing as how so many of us are practicing ecclesial distancing due to the current pandemic, thought it might be a good time to give you another online Sunday school option if like mine, your regular Sunday school has been closed for the time being. So today, we are going to start studying a new entry in our list of zombie heresies. That is, ancient errors from church history that were refuted by our ancestors in the faith long ago, but are nevertheless still somehow shambling around trying to feast on the brains of the faithful. But forewarned is forearmed, and once you learn what these errors are, how they contradict God's word, why they're a big deal, then they won't catch you unaware. And this time we have perhaps an unusual choice, given those criteria, and that is theological liberalism. And just to be clear here, I'm not talking about political liberalism. Say what you want, it's not a heresy. God certainly gives us things like wisdom, good judgment, moral absolutes, and things of that nature, which we use when we govern ourselves or when we govern our subjects, depending on what kind of political system you live in. But God does not provide He does not prescribe a particular political system or program to any of us. We Christians have a certain measure of political freedom in that regard. So again, say what you want about political liberalism. I've said an awful lot about it. It's not a heresy. And also, I'm not talking here about liberal attitudes either, that is, being overly permissive or things of that nature. Again, say what you want about that. It's not necessarily a heresy, and it's not what we're talking about here. What I am talking about here is a specific theological movement from the 19th and 20th centuries that now dominates the mainline Protestant denominations, and really it dominates large swaths of the Church of Rome as well. And it is a movement that's characterized by evolutionary or progressive theology. That's as opposed to a theology that's been handed over by Christ to the Spirit, and by the Spirit to the apostles, and the apostles to the church. The faith once and all handed over to the saints. In progressive theology, you can think of the apostles more like those the image of that first fish that supposedly walked out of the ocean, right? It was an important step in our development, and it tells us a certain something about our heritage, but we don't have anything left to learn from that fish about surviving on land. Likewise, in progressive theology, you don't really have a whole lot left to learn from the apostles because you're just so much more advanced than they were. It's also characterized by personal or communal experience, replacing Christ and his Holy Scriptures as our chief way of knowing about God. Christ is relevant as a story. The Bible is relevant as an historical artifact. But in theological liberalism, the best theology is pretty much always the newest. It's the cutting-edge theology that's the best. Thus, it's always our current communal experiences and the trends of the time that are the most important things. Doctrine and tradition really just get in the way of those things. It's also marked by anti-supernatural views, because this was the way that philosophy was going during the Enlightenment when this all got started. The supernatural can't really be investigated by science, by the scientific method, because it's not really reproducible by its nature. Therefore, they thought that it wasn't accessible to human reason in any way, and therefore they thought it must not exist if it's not accessible to human reason, which is not reasonable. It's not logical, but it's certainly the spirit of the time. And you combine that kind of bias with this idea that the best theology is always on the cutting edge. And what you end up with is theological liberalism getting the sense that humankind couldn't possibly believe in God and miracles and resurrections and things of that nature anymore. So Christianity had to either change with the times or die. They sought to reinvent Christianity apart from the supernatural, apart from the doctrine, apart from Scripture, apart from Christ. So, is this really a zombie heresy? As I said before, it's kind of an odd choice, considering how recent it is compared to, something like Gnosticism or modalism. So, we'll take it in two parts. Is it a zombie? Is it a heresy? So, is it a zombie? Because, again, we are talking about something that's relatively recent, and that is still ongoing in many respects. So, I would say it is, because while it may not be dead per se, it is certainly in major and absolutely irreversible decline. The mainline Protestant denominations, of which, again, that's where theological liberalism really swarmed and bred there. The ELCA, Presbyterian Church USA, Episcopalians, and so forth. All these mainline denominations are absolutely just hemorrhaging members. When you look at the last, since the late 1970s, early 1980s, United Methodists, they've declined by about a third. So is the ELCA. So have the Episcopalians. They've lost about a third of their members in that time. Other denominations like United Church of Christ or Presbyterian Church USA, they've lost about half of their members or more. So yeah, that's absolutely major, serious decline there. And to be sure, part of that is Americans becoming less overtly religious in general, but it is happening at a much, much faster clip among theological liberals. You compare that to, say, my denomination, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and we've declined by a lot in that time. We've declined a little under 20%, I want to say. But you look at that decline, and that is commensurate with the decline in the birth rates of the demographics that make up our denomination. Our problem is that we're not having babies, not that people are leaving our churches in droves. With mainline Protestantism, people are leaving the churches in droves. So, in other words, it's not quite dead, but it'll be stone dead in a moment, and it's already thrown up on that card to be hauled away. And it's also, well, the other reason we're getting into zombie territory here, it is being repackaged. It's had a few attempted repackagings under labels like the Emergent or Emerging Church, which was popular about a decade ago, or Progressive Christianity, which is the more current label. But in all those cases, you were taking the same old theological liberalism, giving it a spit shine and trying to pass it off as something new. And the other thing that you have happening is that when all these different old mainline congregations are dying and closing their doors, every time you get a fair amount of their members who have decided to, well, we're just going to move on to another church in a similar denomination that may have had some historic ties with us or something along those lines, something with a little bit of nostalgia value. And so these people leave their dead churches and join new ones where they start pushing for exactly the same kind of changes in policy and practice and teachings that killed their original denominations, and start pushing for those in the new denominations. Basically the same thing that happens when people flee California because it's going down the toilet, and then they move to a new state and they vote for exactly the same kind of policies that have changed California so much. So yeah, I think zombie is absolutely a fair description in this case. So the second part, is it a heresy? Are we really talking about something that's, being severed from the true church and from her Lord? And that is a difficult one for people to say flat out, because so many of our friends and family may very well be theological liberals or belong to those kinds of denominations. That's certainly the case for me. And it's a little easier when you have heresies like Arianism or modalism or Gnosticism, because those are pretty common, a lot more common than we think. That's what my previous series were about. But very few people actually self-identify that way. Theological liberalism is a little bit different because that's been openly in vogue and popular for the past 150 years. And so you have many individuals, congregations, and denominations that, people that we know, churches that we're familiar with, that openly affiliate themselves with these doctrines. That makes us a lot more uncomfortable if we want to label that as outright heresy. But it absolutely is. It is absolutely outright heresy. We talked about heresy as a matter of having either having the wrong God or of having the wrong gospel. And theological liberalism really does both of those things. It certainly has the wrong God. We'll talk about this later, but it ends up in pretty much the same place as modalism, only by a different route. And it has the wrong gospel as well. It ends up in the same place as Pelagianism, which we haven't talked about. But it's the idea that we save ourselves by perfectly adhering to God's law. It just uses a different law than what Pelagius used. At its core, true Christianity, faithful Christianity, is fundamentally about humanity being sinners, each one of us regularly doing wrong, hurting others, disrespecting God, and about God becoming one of us in response to that problem, a flesh and blood human being just like you or I, living a sinless life in our stead without doing wrong, without harming anyone, without disrespecting God, and then being punished in our place, dying on a cross. He took our punishment, we get his righteousness. His death is our death. His resurrection is our resurrection. That's what Christianity is really about. Theological liberalism, on the other hand, is ultimately about humanity bettering itself by making society a better place and creating a heaven on earth, slowly evolving over time. It's essentially all about Christians saving the world and saving one another by doing good works. It's a kind of social Pelagianism. And either of those things would mark this out as an alien religion, something that is not Christianity. And with both of those in place, yeah, it's quite clear. Theological liberalism is not Christianity. It came from Christianity. It's a heresy of Christianity, but it is not the one true faith in any way, shape, or form. So, if it's that bad, how did so many formerly Christian churches fall into something like this? And that is what we're going to start digging into next time when we consider the history of theological liberalism.